"You can't make us like you." Tommy, the eldest of the three brothers, yelled, hurling a toy truck at her leg. "We don't want another nanny. We want our mum." His two younger brothers, Danny and Bobby, stood behind him like loyal soldiers, ready for a fight. Their small faces were streaked with tears and dirt. They'd driven off 17 nannies in 6 months, and they were determined to make Belinda number 18. But as Belinda looked at these heartbroken children, she didn't see monsters. She saw 3 little boys drowning in grief and fear, desperately trying to protect themselves from being hurt again. "I know you miss your mum," Belinda said softly, carefully stepping over the broken toys scattered across the floor. "And I'm not here to replace her. I'm here because I think you need someone who understands what it's like to have your whole world fall apart." The boys stopped throwing things, stunned by her gentle words. No nanny had ever spoken to them like this. Tommy stared at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You don't know anything about us." Belinda knelt, bringing herself to their eye level. "You're right. I don't know everything about you yet, but I do know you're scared. I know you're angry. And I know you think that if you're just awful enough to me, I'll leave, just like everyone else." The 3 boys exchanged a look, clearly caught off guard. "But here's the thing," Belinda continued with a faint smile. "I'm not going anywhere, and by the end of today, I'm going to show you something that will change everything." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "What?" Belinda stood, brushing a stray piece of fluff from her dress. "I'm going to show you that it's okay to let someone new care about you, even when your heart is breaking." Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hall, and the boys' faces went white with fear. "Dad's coming," Danny whispered. "He's going to be so mad about this mess." But what happened next would shock everyone in that house, especially the man who had spent the last 6 months believing his sons were beyond reach. For the past 6 months, John Whitaker's world had been an unending whirlwind of crises. His phone rang non-stop. If it wasn't his assistant calling about another nanny who had just walked out, it was the school reporting the latest incident. That morning was no exception. "Mr. Whitaker," his assistant Rebecca's voice came through the line the moment he answered. "I have bad news, and I have worse news." John massaged his temples, feeling the familiar throb of a headache setting in. "Let's have the bad news first. The school just called. The boys started a food fight, locked a teacher in the supply closet, and are refusing to go to class. They said the school's patience is running thin." John exhaled, a heavy, weary breath. "And the worst news. Nanny number 17, Mrs. Patterson, has quit. She said, and I quote, 'Those children are demonic, and no amount of money is worth risking my sanity.'" John felt his world cracking at the seams. 6 months ago, he'd had it all. A beautiful wife, 3 happy sons, a perfect life. Now, Sarah was gone, killed in a tragic car accident, leaving him to struggle alone with 3 heartbroken little boys who seemed determined to burn down the world as an outlet for their grief. "Rebecca, call the agency," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "Tell them we need someone immediately." "Sir, I already did," Rebecca replied, her tone laced with helplessness. "They said they're out of candidates. Word has gotten out about the boys. No one wants to work for the Whitakers anymore." John fell silent, a wave of helplessness washing over him. He was a billionaire, a man who could solve any problem in the boardroom, yet he couldn't heal the wounds in his own home. The truth was, he too was drowning in grief. Sarah had been the heart of their family. Without her, John was lost and overwhelmed. He threw himself into his work to escape the empty house and the accusing eyes of his sons. They never said it, but he knew they blamed him for their mother's death. The guilt was an invisible weight, crushing him day by day. "Sir," Rebecca's voice pulled him back to the present. "What are my next steps?" John stared into the distance, a desperate decision forming. "Post an ad online, offer double the standard salary. There has to be someone out there brave enough or desperate enough to take this job." But little did he know, His desperate act was about to bring someone who wouldn't just take the job, but would change their family's destiny forever. Miles away, in a small, cozy apartment that was a stark contrast to the cold luxury of the Whittaker mansion, Belinda Johnson was scrolling through job listings. A long day of caring for other people's children had ended, and she was looking for a new challenge, a place where she could truly make a difference. When Belinda saw John Whittaker's ad, she almost scrolled past it. The description was daunting. Seeking a nanny capable of handling a highly challenging environment. It was rich people speak for. Our kids are out of control, and we're out of options. A quick online search gave her the reason why. 6 months ago, Sarah Whittaker had died in a car crash, leaving behind her husband and their 6-year-old triplet sons. A breath caught in Belinda's chest. The chill of loss washed over her, painfully familiar, because she had once been that lost 6-year-old in a world suddenly without parents. She knew that rage wasn't defiance, it was armor. She knew that silence wasn't stubbornness, it was fear. Those boys don't need a nanny, Belinda whispered to herself. They need someone who gets it. She spent the rest of the night writing an application completely different from any resume she had ever sent. The next morning, John Whittaker sat behind a mahogany desk in his vast, luxurious, and cold office. A single letter lay inside Belinda's otherwise empty file. Weariness and skepticism were etched onto his face. "Your file," John began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It contains a single letter, no experience, no references." Belinda sat up straight, meeting his gaze directly, unafraid. "Because what your sons need can't be found on a resume, Mr. Whittaker." "That's a nice line, but it's not experience," John countered, his tone sharp. "And the fact is, 17 qualified people have failed. You have nothing. So what makes you think you can succeed?" Belinda didn't flinch. "I have life experience, sir, and it's the only kind of experience that matters right now." She looked straight at him, the sincerity in her eyes undeniable. "I understand what your sons are going through, because I was once an orphaned child facing that same grief." Silence filled the room. For the first time, a crack appeared in John's rigid facade. Seeing it, Belinda pressed on, her voice softening, but filled with certainty. "Your sons aren't bad, Mr. Whittaker. They're grieving. Their grief is so big that it's turned into anger. They're not acting out to cause trouble. They're acting out because they don't know any other way to show the pain they're feeling inside." She paused, letting her words truly sink in. "They don't need a disciplinarian. They need someone who won't leave when they push them away. Someone who understands that behind all that rage is just fear." John slowly set the file down on the desk. He looked at Belinda, no longer as an employer, but as a desperate father. 17 of them, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Not one of them ever told me that." After a long silence, John made his decision with a simple question, one that came not from his head, but from a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in months. "When can you start?" The next day, Belinda stepped across the threshold of the Whittaker mansion. She was met with silence, a heavy, watchful silence. She knew it was the calm before the storm. Following a faint noise to the living room, she found that, just as she'd expected, the battle had already begun. The room looked like a tornado had torn through it. Feathers from ripped-open pillows floated in the air like snow. Streaks of crayon marred the cream-colored walls. Toy trucks were flipped over, and stuffed animals lay scattered like fallen soldiers. And in the center of it all stood 3 little generals. "You can't make us like you," Tommy, the eldest, shouted, throwing a pillow at her. "Go away," Danny and Bobby yelled in unison, standing behind their brother like a loyal army. The 17 nannies before her might have yelled back, or threatened them, or burst into tears. Belinda did none of those things. She just stood there, letting the pillow fall harmlessly at her feet, and then she did something completely unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but a gentle, knowing one. The warm sound of it echoed through the chaos, stopping the three boys in their tracks. They had been prepared for a fight, not for this. "What's so funny?" Tommy snapped, clearly thrown off. "Nothing," Belinda said softly, carefully stepping over an overturned fire truck to get closer. She made no move to clean up. Instead, she sat right down on the floor, in the middle of their battlefield. "It just reminds me of myself." She sat cross-legged, meeting their eyes directly. "When I was little, I used to make messes like this too. I drew on walls, I tore up pillows, I threw my toys." Three pairs of eyes widened in surprise. "Why?" Danny asked timidly. Belinda pulled a worn silver locket from her pocket, the one she carried like a talisman. She opened it. "Because I was so angry and so sad. I missed my parents so much." She held it out for them to see. They were in an accident too, and after they were gone, I felt so alone. I thought that if I was bad enough, if I was awful enough, no one would want to get close to me, and if no one got close, then no one could ever leave me again. She had given voice to their deepest, unspoken fear, a fear they didn't even have the words for. Silence fell over the room, but this time it wasn't tense. For the first time, the boys' shields began to lower. Belinda looked at each of their small faces. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to make me leave, just like everyone else." She paused, her voice becoming firm and warm. "But I'll let you in on a little secret. It's not going to work on me." Tommy's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why not?" "Because I'm not going anywhere," Belinda said, each word an oath. "Others may have left, but I'm not leaving. I'm here to stay. No matter how many pillows you throw or how many walls you draw on, I'm here to stay." And that was it. The promise. The one their broken hearts had been craving to hear. They didn't need discipline. They needed permanence. They didn't need control. They needed certainty. Tommy, their little leader, the one who was always the strongest, his lips trembled. He stared at Belinda, the battle in his eyes beginning to subside. He took one small step forward. "You promise?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Belinda nodded, a warm smile gracing her lips. "I promise." In that moment, something shifted. The wall of ice around the three boys' hearts began to crack. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a start. It was the start of trust. But trust isn't built in a day, and the boys' defensive walls were still high. They continued to test her, not with the all-out battles from before, but with smaller rebellions. One evening, Tommy shoved his plate of spaghetti onto the floor simply because he didn't like the sauce. Another nanny would have yelled and given him a timeout. Belinda just calmly got a cloth, knelt, and began to clean. "It seems like you're feeling really angry," she said softly, not looking at Tommy but focusing on her task. "Do you want to tell me about it?" Tommy, who had been braced for a confrontation, was stunned by the response. He mumbled, "I just don't like it." "I understand," Belinda replied. "Next time, maybe we can pick out the sauce together. No punishment, no anger, just understanding and a solution." Day by day, Belinda met every tantrum with patience, every act of defiance with an open ear. When Danny accidentally spilled a pitcher of water, she just handed him another towel. When Bobby locked himself in his room, she didn't pound on the door, she simply sat outside it, telling him softly that she'd be right there waiting for whenever he was ready to come out. Slowly, a miraculous change began to take hold. The outbursts became less frequent because they no longer worked. Instead of acting out for attention, Bobby started coming to Belinda quietly to show her a broken toy. Instead of fighting over things, Danny started asking to borrow his brother's stuff. The house was no longer a battlefield. For the first time in months, it began to feel like a home. As the storms of anger subsided, Belinda knew that underneath lay an ocean of unspoken grief. She knew the boys needed a way to process the pent-up emotions about their mother, feelings for which they had no words. So, she brought art and nature into their lives. One sunny afternoon, she laid out drawing paper and watercolors in the backyard, in the same spot where Sarah had once grown the most vibrant red roses. "Today, let's paint our happiest memories," she suggested. At first, they painted cars, dinosaurs, and superheroes. But then, Danny quietly picked up a yellow paint and created a figure with hair that shone like the Sunday. He painted red flowers all around it. Belinda sat beside him, without pressing. "This is a beautiful painting. Can you tell me about it?" Danny's eyes welled with tears. "It's Mom," he whispered. "She had golden hair, and she loved the red roses in this garden." As if a floodgate had opened, Tommy picked up a brush too. "Mom used to call us her Three Musketeers." Bobby, the quietest of the three, pointed to a red heart he had just painted next to the golden-haired woman. "I miss Mom." It was the first time they had spoken of their mother without anger, only with a tender sense of longing. From that day on, their paintings became their language. They painted stories of her, Mom reading to them, Mom baking cookies, Mom holding them in her arms. Each painting was a tear dried, a beautiful memory honored. Belinda also taught them how to garden, planting new seeds in the very soil their mother had once tended. As they worked the earth and watered the plants, it was as if they were connecting with her in a new way. They learned that, like seeds, love could still sprout and grow, even after a long, cold winter. The house was no longer haunted by her absence. Instead, it was filled with the memory of her. Laughter began to replace the tears, and stories of their mother became sweet lullabies that soothed their slowly healing hearts. That peace didn't just stay within the walls of the house. It began to radiate outward, and the first sign John Whitaker noticed was the silence. At first, John didn't notice. He had become so accustomed to the rhythm of catastrophe. Every day, he'd go to his office and, on instinct, he would wait. He waited for the call from Rebecca, her voice strained, for the email from the principal, for the text announcing that the latest nanny had finally walked. The silence from the school stretched for a week, and it became more alarming than any complaint call. It was that silence that compelled John to go home early, driven by a curiosity he thought was long dead. He stepped into the house and froze, not because of the quiet, but because of the sounds he heard, the soft sound of giggles, of whispers, and over it all, the gentle tone of Belinda's voice. Tucking himself out of sight in the hallway, he peered into the living room. His three sons were huddled on the rug around Belinda, crayons in hand. The scene itself was a miracle. Then he heard it, the small, hesitant voice of Bobby, his quietest son. "Mom had a yellow dress just like this one. She wore it when we went on our picnic." John's chest tightened. He had always avoided the subject of Sarah, terrified of dredging up more pain. But here was his son, speaking of her with such sweet fondness, with none of the anger. "That sounds like a wonderful memory, Bobby," Belinda smiled. "Would you like to draw that dress? We could hang it up so we'll always remember that day." John stood motionless. A simple, stunning truth washed over him. Belinda wasn't trying to erase their grief. She was giving it space to breathe, transforming the ghost of a memory into something warm to be cherished. His gaze drifted to the new pictures taped to the refrigerator, then back to his three sons, who were completely absorbed in their art. This house wasn't just orderly anymore. It was coming back to life. John Whitaker's evenings had changed. Instead of hiding himself away in his office, he found himself drawn to the family's shared spaces, even long after the boys were asleep. He would often sit in the quiet living room, looking at the children's drawings taped to the walls, each one a piece of Sarah's memory they had reclaimed. One night, Belinda came downstairs for a glass of water and found John standing before the refrigerator. His finger was gently tracing one of the drawings, Bobby's picture of the yellow dress. The soft kitchen light cast his face in shadow, revealing a profound sadness he usually kept so carefully hidden behind his cold exterior. Belinda stood still for a moment, not wanting to intrude on his private moment. But then she realized something. The boys had her to share their grief with, but John, he was completely alone in his. She stepped softly into the kitchen. "That's a lovely drawing," she said quietly, her voice holding no pity, only acknowledgement. Bobby was so proud of it. John started, but he didn't turn away. He just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the picture. Yellow was her favorite color, he said, his voice thick, as if the words were trapped in his throat. Belinda stood beside him in a comfortable silence, creating a safe space. She recognized his hesitation, the familiar fear of confronting a painful memory. "I understand if you don't want to talk about it," she offered gently. "We're often afraid that saying their names will only bring back the pain." She paused, then continued, a genuine warmth in her voice. "But sometimes, silence is what truly takes them from us a second time, telling their stories. That's how we keep their memory alive, isn't it?" Her question didn't demand an answer. It was an invitation, a permission slip. John looked at her, and for the first time, he saw true understanding in someone else's eyes. He had spent the last 6 months trying to bury the past. Belinda was gently showing him how to live with it. He let out a long breath, one that seemed to carry the weight of months of suppression. "She made that dress herself," he said suddenly, his voice fractured but clear. "She wore it on our first real family picnic, when the boys were 3. She said she wanted to look like a sunflower." Once that door to memory was opened, the stories began to spill out, haltingly at first, then with a steadier flow. They sat down at the kitchen table in the quiet of the sleeping house. For the first time, John wasn't speaking as a billionaire or a boss. He was speaking as a man remembering the love of his life. "We met in a small art gallery," he began, his voice softening. "I was there to buy a piece as an investment. She was the artist." A sad smile touched his lips. "I bought the painting, but looking back, I think I was just trying to buy myself another 5 minutes to talk to her." And just like that, the stories flowed. He spoke of a buttoned-up businessman completely captivated by a free-spirited artist, of how she brought laughter into a life that had only ever been about numbers. Belinda just listened, occasionally giving a small nod, her presence a silent invitation for him to continue. "We had a dream," he said after a long pause, as the night outside deepened, a small house by the sea, just big enough for her art studio and for the boys to be able to run straight out and catch the waves. In that moment, John no longer saw a nanny. He saw a friend, a confidant. He realized that rebuilding a family wasn't an impossible task. Perhaps he just needed someone to help him find the pieces. 6 months later, the Whitaker mansion no longer echoed with the silence of grief, but with the sounds of a life being truly lived. The loudest laughter often came from the kitchen, which had become the heart of the home. On a Saturday afternoon, Flour dusted the tip of Bobby's nose, while Tommy tried to sneak a bite of cookie dough, and Danny carefully cut out star-shaped cookies. In the middle of the sweet chaos were John and Belinda, no longer boss and employee, but partners in a joyful battle. "Dad, Tommy's eating the dough again," Danny tattled, a wide grin on his face. John, his own hands covered in flour, just shook his head and laughed. "I can run a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but I'm completely powerless against 3 musketeers and a batch of cookies." Belinda looked at him, their eyes meeting over the boys' heads. A silent, knowing smile was exchanged. "You're a wonderful father, John," she said softly. "That's what matters." In that moment, John realized their relationship had shifted far beyond a professional one, without him even noticing. Belinda wasn't just his son's caregiver. She was the partner who had walked with him through his darkest days. She was the one who had taught him how to be a father again, not by giving orders, but by listening. They had become a team, nurturing and rebuilding this home together from a foundation of patience and love. The house was no longer a place of grief and emptiness. It was filled with new memories, pictures proudly taped to the refrigerator, seeds sprouting in the garden, and evenings where all 5 of them piled onto the sofa to read a story. The 3 boys had found their peace. They still missed their mother, but now the ache of missing her was no longer an open wound, but a bright star in their memory, a warm place held safely in their hearts. That evening, after the cookies were gone and the three boys were fast asleep, John and Belinda sat in the quiet living room. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace, casting their dancing shadows on the walls. John looked at Belinda as she idly flipped through one of the boys' picture books. He saw the strength in her gentleness, the wisdom in eyes that had witnessed too much loss. "Belinda," he began, his voice low and warm. "Thank you for everything." She looked up and smiled. "We did it together." No more words were needed. In that warm silence, an unspoken promise was exchanged. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. Together, they would build a true family, a place where every heart, no matter how broken, could find a safe harbor to heal. The house had found its heart again, and this was their new beginning.